Airline Pilot Guy, episode number 114.
Flight 209, are you clear for takeoff?
Roger.
LA departure 123.9.
Roger. Request that
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 329 at the Sheraton in Tucson, Arizona. In this episode, a stowaway teenager survives the flight from San Jose to Hawaii in the wheel well. Bees on a plane, literally. More news, feedback, and your questions. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 114 is ready for pushback. Hello everybody and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy. I am Captain Jeff, a line pilot for a major U.S. legacy airline. And I say I fly for Acme because I'm not an official spokesperson for the real airline, the real legacy airline I fly for. So, I'm on another 4-day trip after last week's absence on a trip. It was good to get back. It's a 4-day, we're on day 2 right now. Yesterday we flew from Atlanta to Austin, back to Atlanta, and then back to Austin. Enjoyed some great Texas barbecue at Stubbs Barbecue, just north of 6th Street in Austin, Texas. Great town. And then early this morning flew from there to Atlanta and then here to Tucson, Arizona. Tomorrow, and we end up in Washington, Dulles, Washington International Airport, nearby in Fair Lakes, I think, is the area in Virginia, I believe, where the hotel is. And then finally, on Friday, day 4, one leg home to Atlanta. It's been a good trip so far. The weather, for the most part, has been very docile. A little bit of rain shower activity in Atlanta yesterday. A little bit of a thunderstorm deviation, but very, very minor. For the most part, still pretty cool out there, and we were staying above most of the buildups out there. So that worked out very nicely. And today was perfect. Very, very nice weather. Mostly smooth air out there where we were flying anyway. Let's see what else. That's about it. You're caught up. I am back in my hotel studio. Today's studio number 329. As I said, at the Sheraton in Tucson, Arizona. Not downtown. I'm not sure exactly what part of town they call this, but it's pretty nice from what I can tell. I did a little bit of prep work for the show. I thought I was going to hit the record button right away, and I decided, you know what? I need to take a little nap. And so I slept for about 20 minutes, and so if I look a little groggy, that's why. Okay, on with the show. Now, I meant to mention this either last episode or the episode before, but I keep forgetting, and mainly because I had all my show notes all laid out just perfectly last time, and then for some reason I must have deleted the show note file or something. I don't know. It just disappeared. And disappearing with it was the note to mention that one of our listeners from the very beginning and contributors in so many ways, Hillel, he was a guest on the Airplane Geeks podcast, episode number 293, entitled, suspiciously enough, or actually obviously enough, an aerospace engineer. Hillel was one of those who I have met on a couple different occasions in the Baltimore area, and he was with us on that last meetup that we had several months ago in Baltimore. And so I'm going to put a link in my show notes to Hillel's appearance on the Airplane Geeks podcast, again, episode number 293. But don't worry about looking it up because I'll have the link in the show notes for you to click on and listen. And Hillel does a wonderful job of guest hosting on their fabulous podcast. So congratulations, Hillel, on that. You did a great job. Also, just a quick mention. I mentioned this on the last episode. Jetstream Radio picked me up. Just want to let you know I'm not getting any compensation at all for being on the Jetstream Radio internet radio feed. I just want to help them out with some content, and of course, that will help me maybe gain some more audience. And I believe that the first show will be airing either Friday afternoon Eastern or Saturday. I'm not sure. I'm a little confused exactly what day, what time slot I'm going to be in, but it doesn't matter. Just head over to jetstreamradio.com, and then hopefully you'll be able to find me on the schedule. So looking forward to that partnership with Jetstream Radio. And if you're listening on Jetstream Radio right now, hey, again, I'm Captain Jeff, the airline pilot guy. Been doing this podcast now for, well, effectively a little bit more than 4 years. And I do it because I love aviation. I have a passion for it, and I talk mostly about stuff that I know something about. A little bit of military aviation because I was in the Air Force for a little over 7 years before I got hired by the major airline that I fly, for which I fly. And I've been doing that for a little bit more than 25 years. But if you want to find out more information about me and the podcast, head over to airlinepilotguy.com. Okay, it is now time for a quick thank you to those who have contributed to my coffee fund.
Johnny, how much more coffee?
No thanks.
This is the Ink Spots, recorded in 1940, the Jabba Jive. And to help offset some of the cost of producing this podcast, I started the Coffee Fund about a year ago. And a couple different ways to do it. You can find out information about that by heading over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. Or just look for the little link on the webpage there. A couple different ways to do it. The classic way, the PayPal donation page. And since the last episode, Garrett and Vernon contributed. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And the other way to do it is via Patreon. And since the last episode, no new patrons on Patreon. So, again, more information about how you can become a part of this endeavor by contributing to the Coffee Fund over at airlinepilotguy.com/coffee.
Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup.
Okay, and then also on the last episode I mentioned, so we got some feedback from, trying to remember who it was now, somebody in Germany. I don't remember your name, but I remember that you're from Germany. Mentioned or asked about the possibility of a little bit of Airline Pilot Guy merchandise, like coffee mugs or T-shirts and that kind of stuff. And I did receive some positive feedback from a few of you regarding that, so continue to look into that. I will. And by the way, Super Dave MC, one of my frequent contributors to the podcast, he produced and created a graphic that is essentially an L-1011, because I did fly the L-1011 for about 3 years as a first officer at Acme. And so he drew a kind of an animated, not animated, but a lifelike L-1011 with a mustache and a captain's hat, and Acme Airlines on the livery of the airplane. So I might offer that as a coffee mug, or an option to have as a coffee mug and or T-shirt. So anyway, we'll stay tuned for more about that in the future. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the latest news. I'm sure that all of you have heard about the incident where a 16-year-old or 15-year-old, depending on which article you look at, a teenager, a boy who lives in the San Jose area, basically jumped security fences and ended up hopping into the wheel well of a 767 on Hawaiian Airlines. What happened to my computer? Oh my goodness. My computer just ended up shutting down because I forgot to plug it in. Okay, so I'm going to have to pause because this is where all my show notes are on my laptop. So I'm going to hit the pause button, and so don't go anywhere, okay? Okay, I'm back. Thank you for bearing with me there with my technical faux pas. The laptop is plugged in again, and I got it restarted, and all my applications, I believe, are restored. So anyway, I was talking about the teenager that hopped on the Hawaiian Airlines flight number 45 on Sunday morning, just a few days ago. Officials say that the 16-year-old boy is lucky to be alive and unharmed after flying from California to Hawaii, stowed away in the plane's wheel well, surviving cold temperatures at 38,000 feet and a lack of oxygen. He doesn't even remember the flight, according to officials. FBI spokesperson Tom Simon in Honolulu told the Associated Press. Let's see. It's amazing he survived that. Of course, we just said that. The boy was questioned by the FBI after being discovered on the tarmac at the Maui airport Sunday morning with no identification. Simon said, this is the FBI spokesperson, that security footage from the San Jose airport verified that the boy from Santa Clara, California, okay, he's not from San Jose, nearby Santa Clara, California, hopped a fence to get to Hawaiian Airlines Flight 45. The child had run away from his family after an argument. When the Boeing 767 landed in Maui, the boy hopped down from the wheel well and started wandering around the airport grounds. He was unconscious for the lion's share of the flight. The flight lasted about 5.5 hours. Hawaiian Airlines spokeswoman Allison Croyle said airline personnel noticed the boy on the ramp after the flight arrived and immediately notified airport security. So, interesting that this guy survived that flight because, as many of you know, the conditions in the wheel well, it's not pressurized and it's not heated, can be pretty brutal. And one of the listeners sent me a link to this article in Gizmodo, gizmodo.com. How the heck did his body make it through the sub-zero temperatures with little oxygen? Probably by going into suspended animation, a strange frozen state that's about as close as you can get to death without dying. Since 1947, 105 people are known to have stowed away in wheel wells, and 25 of them have survived. So out of 105, 25 of them have survived. So that's almost 25% rate of survival. Or if you want to be a pessimist, about a 75% chance you're going to die. In many of these cases, the flights were shorter and at lower altitudes, so this boy's story is certainly one of the more incredible. The Hawaii-bound flight flew as high as 38,000 feet. Stowing away on that flight would be like ascending past the top of Mount Everest and back down in a few hours. Some experts have expressed incredulity at his survival, but security camera footage at the San Jose airport seems to corroborate his story. So when you're up in the air, there are three main dangers: lack of oxygen, freezing temperatures, and, of course, falling out of the wheel well. And that's the part that, all three baffle me, but I don't know where you would go into, and I'm assuming that he crawled up into the main wheel well. And where do you go? You're up there and you hold on to something, and then all of a sudden the airplane's rolling down for takeoff, and then the gear doors open and the main landing gear starts coming right at you. I don't know how you do that without getting crushed in there. But apparently there is a way, because it's been done a few times before. Oxygen depletion would quickly knock you unconscious, which is why falling is a particular hazard. As strange as it may sound, the cold is likely what saved the boy from lack of oxygen, as his metabolism slowed almost to a halt in suspended animation. The temperatures outside the airplane at 38,000 feet can drop to 80 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. The freezing conditions were probably enough to make his body temperature drop 20 or 30 degrees to enter the hibernation-like state of suspended animation. Heartbeats and breaths slow dramatically, and cellular activity in the body nearly stops. If your body isn't doing much, it doesn't need much oxygen. It was likely that this state allowed the boy to survive without brain damage. Heat from hydraulic lines that power the wheels, as well as the wheels themselves, could also provide some buffer from the cold, according to an FAA report. That may be what helped the boy from suffering severe frostbite, which befell other surviving stowaways. In the controlled conditions of a hospital, doctors will sometimes put patients into suspended animation to slow tissue damage after, say, a heart attack or stroke. The first human trials of using the cold to treat trauma patients are just starting up too. What's interesting is that the conditions of this flight seem to be a crude approximation of a medical procedure. Or put another way, modern medicine is often a precise series of steps that push the human body to its limits. Doctors try to control for as many variables as possible, but it's a calculated risk. So on goes this particular article from Gizmodo. So interesting how the teenager ended up surviving this flight. And they say that he doesn't remember very much, which is probably a good thing, because if you weren't unconscious, I would imagine that it would be a painful experience until you probably just fell asleep and died. So interesting. And you may have heard about this. I'm not sure. One of the listeners sent this to me, and I don't recall who, but whoever it was, thank you. What's that? A plane was hit by a massive bee swarm and was forced to land. Passengers thought that the plane was on fire. The Allegiant Air flight was taking off from the Las Vegas airport when it plowed through a giant swarm of bees. Thousands of bees completely covered the plane's windshield, while even more were sucked into the engines. Passenger Misty Newman said it smelled like the whole cabin was on fire. Pilots quickly turned the aircraft around and landed back at Las Vegas McCarran Airport. When we landed, the fire department and the cops were waiting, and they took off along the runway after us. During the event, those on board were not told what happened. I find that hard to believe. After the flight landed safely, passengers were switched to another airplane before they discovered that their day had been interrupted. That doesn't make any sense either. They were switched to another airplane before they discovered that their day had been interrupted? Okay. After a short stay on the ground, the flight continued to Duluth, Minnesota, 100% bee-free. And that was from a local news outlet in Las Vegas. So we've heard about strange goings-on with bees in the past, but never heard of an airplane actually hitting a swarm of bees and having to come back and declaring an emergency. Interesting. Speaking of interesting, now this is kind of crazy, and I believe my good friend and listener Inge in the Netherlands sent this link to me. Monarch Airlines British carrier Monarch Airlines has launched an investigation after terrified passengers on a long-haul flight from the Caribbean were left traumatized when the pilot told them that there was a problem with the plane that could have led them to a watery grave. The furious holidaymakers arrived back in London 3 days later than expected after a series of technical problems. The aircraft was forced to make an emergency landing in Barbados after the pilot reported seeing smoke in the cockpit. The initial problem was the plane's reverse thrusters, or thrust reversers, I would say. And as passengers boarded the following day, the pilot compared the technical fault to a problem that hit a Thai Airways flight that flipped over in midair and killed all 213 people on board in 1999. The captain went on to explain that the problem, if not repaired, could have led them all to a quick watery grave. That's exactly what you want to hear, isn't it, while you're on your flight out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? The reference was to LATA Air Flight 004 that crashed on the 26th of May in 1991 due to an uncommanded thrust reverser deployment of the number one engine in flight. The crash killed all 213 passengers and 10 crew members on board and is the deadliest ever crash on Thai soil and the most serious ever involving a Boeing 767. The reverse thrust, which is used to slow the plane down, deployed as the aircraft traveled over mountainous jungle terrain in the border area between a couple Thai provinces. The plane went into a dive at a speed of 0.99 Mach, which may have also broken the sound barrier. One of the passengers on the delayed Monarch flight wrote on Facebook, quote, "Safety is of course the most paramount consideration, but to mention planes flipping over and watery graves as you wait to take off is totally unacceptable." Monarch Airlines admitted in a statement that the pilot used a, quote, "an inappropriate choice of words." We always encourage our pilots to give regular and open updates to our customers. On this occasion, during one update, he used an inappropriate choice of words and has expressed his regret in doing so. Every effort is being made to refund additional expenses incurred as a result of the delay. Oops. Yeah, that was, it's one thing to be honest, but it's another, you got to have a good bedside manner, so to speak, right? Apparently this guy is learning more about that. This is an interesting, or as Paul Harvey would say, oh no, never mind. The details of what really happened are still murky, but what we do know is that the owner of a video camera-equipped hexacopter, a UAV, unmanned aeronautical vehicle, a drone, if you want to call it that, was flying near the scene of a car accident in Springfield, Ohio, earlier this week. Actually, it was longer than that, and earlier this week he was charged with felony obstruction after police said he refused to land his UAV even as a medevac helicopter prepared to touch down. And the guy, Kelly, K-E-L-E, Kelly or Keeley Stanley, told the Associated Press after being arrested that he says, "I'm not an idiot." He would have landed his remote-controlled craft immediately had he known that the medical helicopter was en route. Police tell a different story. Officials say a Clark County Sheriff's deputy told Stanley to stop flying his hexacopter because the medevac helicopter was preparing to land, and that he refused, according to the AP story. The helicopter was able to land and depart safely from the scene. Stanley is facing a felony charge of obstructing official business and misdemeanor charges of misconduct at an emergency and disorderly conduct. He pleaded not guilty during a court appearance on Monday. Stanley said he was shooting the video of the crash scene, which he planned to turn over to local TV stations, as he's done before. I'm sure that he's not getting any money for it, right? Because commercial use of UAVs is prohibited at this time in the United States. The FAA prohibits any use of remote-controlled UAVs except for limited hobbyist flying, although a judge recently ruled that the FAA, the agency, lacks the legal authority to impose such a strict ban. And that ruling has been appealed, so for now the FAA restrictions remain in force. So there we have that. Again, somebody sent me this great link to an article in a blog of the Airline, I keep saying that, Airplane Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA, or AOPA, I call it sometimes. On their blog, one of their members wrote an article and it says contracting, a great career option for the professional pilot. And in it, he talks about an option that is available out there as a piloting career, flying business jets, but basically being your own contractor. And I don't want to read word for word this blog, but there are some pros and there are some cons regarding this form of flying. And the pros, I'll just mention a few of them. You've got some control over your schedule, and you can decline trips. He says, I really hate doing that because I don't want the company to stop calling me, and you never know when things will slow down. So it's smart to sock away some acorns for the winter. But if you got a big vacation planned or your best friend is getting married, you're ultimately in control. They can work with multiple operators. So, these small jet operator outfits, or let's say businesses that have their own biz jets, and let's say that one of their pilots, takes an extended leave of absence for whatever reason, and if they don't have the staff required to fly the airplane, then they'll go to these independent contractors, and so that's what this contract flying is all about. Contract pilots aren't tied to a seniority system. If you're an experienced captain at Company A, you needn't start over as the lowest paid right-seater at Company B, which is the case for airlines, for instance. Contractors earn far more per day than full-time employees, and therefore needn't work as many days to reach a given income level. That means better quality of life, especially if you're married and or have kids. Contract pilots are typically paid by the day. He says, I might have a 5-day trip consisting of a flight to Hawaii, followed by 3 days on the island before flying home. That's 5 days on the clock. It can be a more lucrative system than one where you're compensated based on flight hours only. Operators are essentially purchasing your time. You'll travel the country, if not the world. Instead of a few major airports on larger aircraft like the Gulfstream, you'll see places you'd never dreamed of. So let's see. He says also he gets an honest sense of gratitude from the operators for whom he flies because, by definition, I'm helping them out when they really need a pilot. Okay, the cons. Contractors inherit all the hassles of being your own boss. Does anyone work harder? From providing your own benefits. He says, don't get me started about health care. To paying self-employment taxes. It's not always the carefree work and go-home experience of a full-time employee. You pay for your own training. This is a big one. On a jet, the annual recurrent training costs run into the thousands. I currently allot $15,000 per year for recurrent training and associated costs on his airplane. The expenses are deductible, which helps a bit, but I figure my first month's work each year is spent digging my way back to a financial zero. You can't control when the phone rings. That can mean very short notice trips or weird hours. It can be hard to plan your life out when you never really know what days you'll be working. So it's almost like being constantly on reserve. So anyway, he goes on to mention a few other pros and cons. If you want to check out this article, I'll have a link to it in the show notes for your perusal. So that's another option out there for those aspiring professional pilots. The company that has really helped maybe kind of pin down the position of the missing Malaysia Airlines 370, I say, well, maybe, because we really don't know for sure if any of that information that Inmarsat has been providing is actually legitimate or accurate or whatever. So we still haven't found any evidence on the missing 777. But the company that has been kind of responsible for analyzing some of the satellite pinging that we've talked about on earlier episodes, Inmarsat, said that they plan to offer basic tracking services free of charge to airlines, according to its chairman. It's the strongest sign yet of the aerospace industry's intentions to enhance monitoring abilities for commercial jets. Airlines have long resisted making satellite tracking routine, in part because of the costs. But since Flight 370's disappearance on March 8th, airlines and international safety organizations have shown new interest in such efforts. For Inmarsat's offer to become a reality, any ultimate industry standards for satellite tracking would have to encompass its communication satellites. Andrew Sukawate, I'm not sure that's the proper pronunciation of the chairman's last name, but or his Inmarsat's executive chairman, said in an interview that he was told regulatory authorities. I'm sorry, let me start that again. Andrew blank, Inmarsat's executive chairman, said in an interview that he has told regulatory authorities that if the company is part of a global tracking service, it would offer its tracking free to ease the cost of acceptance. The company estimates that offering the service for free would mean foregoing $10 to $15 million in revenue annually. But, quote, this is such small potatoes against what we're providing commercially. So Inmarsat collected $1.25 billion in revenue in 2013. So he's basically saying it'd be a very, very small little piece of their revenue that they would be foregoing by providing this free service. If its system is used, Inmarsat would cover any required costs to upgrade its network to support the service, but airlines would still have to cover the cost of additional hardware and its installation to periodically transmit their aircraft's position, speed, and altitude, he said. Inmarsat doesn't sell that equipment. And so that's interesting. Of course, there are some downsides to this and some thorny issues, one of which is potential disagreement between carriers that already pay to track their fleets and those potentially unwilling to adopt a global mandate. Airlines such as Air France and Lufthansa already pay to embed position data in other data transmissions that report the status of the airplane for maintenance and operational purposes. And the other downside or thorny issue is that some state-owned airlines are considered extensions of air forces and may be reluctant to incorporate global tracking for national security reasons. So that was from the Wall Street Journal Online, WSJ.com. So that's interesting. That's good news that Inmarsat is stepping up to offer that free service. So you're out there, you're trying to find a job. Do you like Chinese food? Because a shortage of airline pilots is threatening China's hopes of building a world-class commercial airline industry. According to data released this week, the number of pilots in China rose 13% last year, but China still faces a potential shortfall of about 1,000 pilots a year. Analysts estimate the expanding air travel industry will need 3,000 pilots a year as travel expands, but schools are so far producing only about 2,000. China's airline industry is already facing some turbulence. Flight delays are so common that passenger outrage has turned into riots at several airports over the last few years. The country's quickly expanding high-speed rail system is also threatening airline profitability. So to alleviate or to help alleviate some of that shortage, the Chinese carriers have been actively recruiting experienced foreign pilots, especially those from South America, the United States, and other developed markets, with the promise of higher salaries. Shenzhen Airlines recently advertised salaries for captains of up to $212,400 a year. Today, China employs more than 800 foreign pilots out of 18,400 commercial pilots. About a third of all recruitment ads for captains on the careers website of Flight Global, an industry publication, are for Chinese airlines. So, there's another possibility out there for those trying to build their time and ultimately maybe fly for a U.S. or UK or European airline or South African, whatever. That's a possibility out there. Let's see, how are we doing on the time? Got to quickly end the news segment here. This is something interesting that I kind of happened upon and I didn't realize was happening. There is a plan to build and operate a San Diego-Tijuana International Airport. It's a cross-border airport. They're building a cross-border airport terminal. It received final approval, and construction should begin shortly. The plan calls for a 525-foot, or 160-meter, if you prefer, long pedestrian bridge that connects the Tijuana Airport in Mexico to a 65,000 square foot structure on the United States side, where a U.S. Customs and Immigration facility would be manned 7 days a week by Customs and Border Protection officers. The facility would also include parking, shops, and restaurants. The facility is being designed to provide passengers direct access to the terminal from the United States. Departing passengers can park their cars in San Diego and walk across a bridge that crosses the border to the terminal. Arriving passengers would clear U.S. Customs at the new facility without any of the delays common at local border crossings. So I thought that was interesting. We'll learn more about that perhaps in the future. And finally, the latest with Malaysia 370. Just heard a little blurb on CNN before I started doing the recording today, April 23rd, that there is a report that some piece of wreckage, they're not sure if it belongs to Malaysia 370, has shown up on the western shoreline of Australia south of Perth. And I'm not sure if they've actually gone over there to investigate and inspect the part yet or not, and if it has anything to do with the missing Malaysia 370 flight. They said that this piece has rivets on it, but there are a lot of things that could have rivets on it, so they're being careful to say that they're not sure, but this could be the first physical sign of wreckage of Flight 370. I still remain skeptical. And I ran across this article that says that the possibility that MH370 didn't crash but landed gathers steam. The fruitless search for the missing Malaysia Airlines jet might have to start all over again from scratch if no clues to its fate are found in coming days, it was claimed today. The international team searching the Indian Ocean for the Boeing 777 are now considering the seemingly impossible scenario of the aircraft having landed somewhere instead of crashing in the southern Indian Ocean. I've always thought that that could actually be a plausible explanation. We may have to regroup soon to look into this possibility if no positive results come back in the next few days. Sources within the international investigation team were quoted as telling the New Straits Times today. So we'll have to, again, keep our eyes and ears open about the developments on the investigation of Malaysia Flight 370. All right, that ends the news segment. I'm going to go and get some Mexican food with my first officer, and I'll be back either tonight or tomorrow in Washington to record the best part of the show, which, of course, as you all know, is your feedback and questions.
Captain, incoming message.
Thank you. Okay, I'm back. Had a wonderful dinner at La Placita, which I think means, correct me if I'm wrong, I know I have a lot of listeners who speak Spanish, but I think that means the little place. Anyway, it was a little place. It was wonderful. Both the co-pilot and I, the first officer and I, had a chicken enchilada with mole sauce, and it was wonderful. I love mole sauces, and this was a kind of a chocolate-based one, and it was absolutely scrumptious. And also had an IPA before dinner, and enjoyed a margarita with some pretty nice tequila inside. And so if I slur my words, that's because I've had the tequila. Anyway, great time. It was a walk. It was about a little over a mile each way, but it's good to get exercise. So, with that said, it is now time for feedback. So here we go. Let's listen to what Jack has to say.
Hey, Captain Jeff. My name is Jack, and I've been a long-time listener to the show. I'm a huge fan, and always look forward to getting a new episode of my podcast queue and being entertained and educated at the same time. Also, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and if you're ever on layover in this part of the country, I'd love to, buy you a coffee and pick your brain on everything aviation and planes.
I am going to be in Washington tomorrow, but by the time you hear this, it'll probably be after I've been in Washington. So maybe some other time, Jack, but I look forward to sharing a cup of coffee and having conversation with you. So let's continue.
Well, my question is one that you've probably answered a few times before, but I guess I'm just too lazy to go back all the way through your podcast queue. But, ever since I was a young child, I was fascinated with planes, and there were long periods of my life when I wanted to be a pilot. Unfortunately, I was a little bit indecisive and had times when I was really dedicated to pursuing that career, and then I would switch career paths and, in college and change from education to biology. Then I'd want to fly again or something like that. And I'm at a point in my life now where, I've got my private pilot certificate, but I haven't flown in a long time. And then I'm in a career field where I could stand to make a really good living and a lot of money and also have great work-life balance. But, I still always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about aviation and how much I love aviation. And I'm fascinated with everything planes and pilots. And, I was just wondering if you were someone who was in their late 20s and you had a promising career in another field, but you were really passionate about aviation, would it be something that you would pursue? And if so, what do you think the best way to pursue that is if you're already in another career field? Another question I might have along those lines is, aviation is a lot like getting a graduate degree in that it's intense training and it also costs a lot of money. So do you have any tips or advice for people on how to handle that financial burden differently, or anything you've learned financially from being a pilot yourself, and especially from the early years in aviation when the pay is very low and the work is very difficult and it's tough to get discouraged? Well, anyway, I really appreciate you listening and hope you'll be able to answer my questions for me, and I look forward to listening to your podcasts.
Well, thanks, Jack, for your feedback. And I understand your predicament, and you're thinking, I have this passion, I really love to do this for a living, but, as they say, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? You're talking about a potential that you have to make a very comfortable living, and to me, that equates to having the disposable income and perhaps the time to go out and enjoy private flying, general aviation type flying. And there are all kinds of things you can do out there, like Fred, the guy that I met from the Bay Area. I follow his YouTube channel, and he's always posting things about the club that he's a member of, where they were doing formation flying and doing all kinds of fun, just wonderful flying, aerobatics and that kind of thing. There are so many things that you can do and enjoy the heck out of aviation that don't require you to do it for a living. Many people say, I remember I used to be a very serious home brewer. I mean, I was studying to be a homebrew judge. I was brewing for more than 10 years. I was doing all grain. I was kegging. I was doing all kinds of advanced things with my beer, and I was pretty proud, and I was pretty proficient at it. And I always thought, I would really love to do this as my job, to make a living out of brewing beer. But then I started reading many, many books that people wrote about serious home brewers that made the extra step toward brewing their own beer on a commercial basis, whether it be a microbrewery or a brew pub kind of a situation. And one after another were saying, it became something that I loved to do, and then it became something that I just dreaded doing. It took all the fun out of it. Now, I'm not saying that that necessarily equates to doing flying for a living and brewing for a living, because I found that even though I fly for a living, I still enjoy flying. But there's the potential that you could definitely turn something into something you have a passion for and you love doing into something that is just a job. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is that if you just can't stand it, you're just you can't imagine doing anything else, and you're depressed and you want to fly for a living. Okay, well, you're young, you're in your late 20s. It's not like you're in your late 30s or late 40s. In that case, I'd say no, just keep doing what you're doing. You're young enough now that where you could, if you wanted to, make the transition, you could. But this is only if it's something that you just can't imagine doing anything else. So let's say, okay, you can't imagine doing anything else. I'm going to make the jump. Well, you're right. The pay, inevitably you're going to be flying for the regional airlines. You're going to incur a lot of debt unless you already have a lot of savings to reach this goal. And is it worth it? It may take the rest of your career to pay back all the debt that you're going to incur to get there. And for some of you, it may be worth it. To others, I'd say the majority, probably not. But if you don't heed my advice by keeping as long as you enjoy what you're doing and you have somewhat of a passion for the job that you're currently doing and it's providing great benefits and good compensation, but you decide, nope, Jeff, I'm gonna go for this career in flying, and I'm going to incur this debt. So how do I get the money to do what I want to do? I just did a search, and this is just one resource. It's called Aviation Schools Online, the top 10 flight training financing tips. And number 1, it says attend an aviation college or university that offers financial aid programs. I have a feeling you already have a college degree, so in this case, I don't think it would apply to you. Number 2 is attend an accredited flight academy offering federal Title IV programs and or private financing. Again, I don't know what's involved with federal Title IV programs. I don't know if you have to meet a certain level of income or lack of income or whatever. I'm not sure what makes you entitled to receive Title IV programs, but there are several flight academies. ATP, Airline Transport Professionals, is one that offer students full financing options for those who qualify. Number 3, serve in the military and use your post-9/11 GI Bill benefits to help pay for flight training, or use your parents' GI Bill benefits. I'm not sure that either of those are going to apply to you. I don't think you have the time to go into the military from this point. If you were young, if you were in your early 20s, I'd say, yeah, that's something to consider. Number 5, flight training scholarships and grants. There's a whole list of different scholarship programs and private grants available to prospective pilots. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can check this out as well if you decide that this is what you want to do. Number 6, work your way through flight school. Number 7, get a loan from Pilot Finance Incorporated. Pilot Finance is a private lending institution specializing in loaning money for flight training for private pilot and or instrument rating candidates in both airplanes and helicopters. I don't know, you may be beyond that point. I don't know, I forgot what you said your ratings were at this point. Number 8, get a private loan from a bank, credit union, person-to-person lender, or family member or friend. Number 9, I can't believe they actually put this as one of the financing options. They say get a credit card specifically for pilot training. Today, most flight training students use a credit card for at least some or all of their flight training financing. Many credit cards have advantages over traditional loans, including zero interest rate introductory periods, ranging from 6 months to more than a year, cash back offers on certain types of purchases, and programs for people with bad credit or no credit, blah, blah, blah. Again, I would probably not recommend using a credit card for paying for your flight training. And then, of course, all of the above is the last thing they list here on this list that you may want to do, like combinations of many of these different ways to fund your flight training. But again, keep in mind, however you do it, there's likely going to be a very large sum of money that you are going to be in debt for, and it's going to be following you for many, 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 many years. And if you're okay with that, then go for it. If you're not, then I would think twice or thrice before committing to something like that, Jack. So I hope that helped. I cannot say, I don't know you. I can't say, oh yeah, you definitely will be miserable unless you're flying for an airline somewhere and doing this job for a living. You may want to just, again, the old adage, the grass is greener, comes into play here. Maybe once you get over here to this side, you're going to go, oh, life was so much better when I had my, job that I could count on a certain amount of income. I had some earning potential, and I had some, income that, discretionary income that I could use to have a lot of fun. Flying airplanes for an airline is a lot of fun, but it's not the same as going out there and, in your own airplane or in a rented airplane, being on your own. It's just a different world, really. So I hope that helped, Jack. And thanks for your feedback. Let's see. I'm going to try to remember to do more of this kind of stuff, like some of the stuff that I found on what happened to it. It's gone. Huh, that's interesting. Well, never mind. I was going to play some music that I had found on YouTube, and it is gone. What happened? Huh. I'll be darned. Okay, well, let's just play this. Sarah writes, I have a quick question regarding pilots and media. Do you wish, since there are so many misconceptions, that there would be more mainstream movies and books produced and written that accurately portrayed the everyday life of a pilot that didn't involve something as rare as a crash? I think that if there were more movies like When a Man Loves a Woman, which is about a pilot who has to cope with his wife's drinking, and fewer movies like Flight, which portrays the first officer as a pushover wimp, that the general public would get a better understanding of what it's really like to be a pilot and maybe be a bit more considerate and patient while traveling. Once I overheard a passenger say that some pilots deliberately delay flights to earn more money when the reality is that the clock doesn't even start ticking until the doors are closed and the plane is ready to push back. They say ignorance is bliss. Well, for those who are informed, ignorance can be a pain in the neck. Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Great feedback. Do I wish... You know what? Yeah, I do. I wish that there were more movies that portrayed, our job more realistically, but it's not going to happen because there's nothing, shocking or nothing that would really draw people to want to watch it. The crashes and all the, the shocking things that some of these movies have are what draw people to watch them. If it's just I don't know. I just don't think it's going to happen, and I'm not sure it's going to really help things at all, but I do agree that the public's perception of what we do and how we make our money is flawed. I do remember once I was either non-revving or deadheading in the back of a 767 or a 75 or something like that, and it was just taking us forever to get out to the runway. And I started hearing, and we weren't moving for quite some time. I started hearing some of the passengers around me say, oh, yeah, and they're saying stuff like, they're purposely delaying this flight. And I'm thinking, how in the world would that be a good thing for a company to do? How is this going to help Acme Airlines? How is this going to help the pay of the pilots? It's not. They're not doing this on purpose. But on the other hand, I was thinking to myself, if the pilots had taken just a few moments to make a PA, as I like to do, if we're out there taxiing along, it's just taking forever, to keep people from making up all these wild ideas about what's going on, I'll say, hey, there's a thunderstorm system going through. There are about 20 airplanes in front of us. It's likely it's going to be another half hour before we are actually airborne. They've shut off the departures because of this, this weather system, whatever. Just give people some information It's just so simple. I can't stress to you how simple and important it is for we as pilots to communicate with our passengers and to tell them what's going on. And it alleviates all these harebrained ideas about what's actually happening. It just really helps so much, and it's so easy to do. I don't know why people have a problem with doing it, but thank you for your comments, Sarah, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future. All right, John writes, "This is John. I'm really a big fan of you." Thank you, John. I'm a big fan of you. I'm not from the States yet. I'm planning to join Flight Safety Academy for my private pilot license, instrument rating, and commercial pilot's license. I hold a BSc, I think that's a Bachelor in Science, in Aerospace Engineering. My question is, what do you think about this flying school, Flight Safety Academy? I don't know anything about it. Maybe some of our listeners do. The other thing is that is having a degree in aerospace engineering, will that help in getting a decent airline job? Well, I think, John, it depends. It depends on where you're trying to get a job, whether it's in the United States or some other country. I know in the United States with a major airline, based on my own experience, that having an engineering degree or an aerospace engineering degree, an aviation management degree, or a basket weaving degree, I'm not sure it makes one hill of beans of difference. I don't think it's that important. They are more concerned with the fact that you have a degree of some sort and that you have all the minimum requirements as far as the hourly time requirements, the ratings that are necessary for you to get an interview with them. And if you've met all those requirements, I guess the only time that I think that it may, like we have applicant A and applicant B, and everything is identical except that applicant B has an aerospace engineering degree and applicant A has a journalism degree. I'm not even sure at that point if that's going to make a difference, but it could, possibly. And again, I'm not talking about the Middle Eastern carriers, the Asian carriers. I don't know, maybe an aerospace engineering degree would carry some clout. It may, I don't know. All I can do is tell you what I know from my own experience. And again, remember, I was in the hiring process and interviewing process more than 25 years ago, so things probably have changed. But as far as I know, I don't think that having an aerospace engineering degree is going to make any difference. But I could be wrong. Just ask my wife. She'll probably tell you that I'm wrong quite often. So that's the best advice I can give to you. And again, anybody listening, if you know anything about the Flight Safety Academy for John earning his certificates, please send me some feedback so we could all learn something about that. Carl writes in, I was reading an article on the CAA website just before listening to episode 112 and immediately wanted to send you this regarding UAVs. A man from Cumbria has become the first person in the UK to be successfully prosecuted for the dangerous and illegal flying of an unmanned aircraft. His name's Robert Knowles, was found to have flown the device in restricted airspace over a nuclear submarine facility, as well as allowing the device to fly too close to a vehicle bridge. Both offenses breached the UK's air navigation order. Mr. Knowles was found guilty on Tuesday, the 1st of April. This is not an April Fool's joke. And fined £800. And let's see. The CAA was also awarded costs of £3,500. So all in all, that's what, £4,300? That's what, about $5,000–6,000 US? No jail time, though. On the 25th of August, the court heard an unmanned aircraft was recovered from water near to a submarine testing facility in Barrow-in-Furness, probably mispronouncing that, operated by the defense company BAE Systems. Analysis by the police of video footage taken from the camera fitted to the device subsequently revealed that during its flight it had skimmed over the busy Jubilee Bridge over Walney Channel, well within the legally permitted 50 meters separation distance required. The UAV had also flown through restricted airspace around the nuclear submarine facility before it inadvertently landed in the water. The UAV was traced to Mr. Knowles, who admitted to building the device himself and operating it on the day in question. He was charged with flying a small unmanned surveillance aircraft within 50 meters of a structure and flying over a nuclear installation. The CAA said that the conviction sends a message to recreational users of UAVs that these devices are subject to aviation safety rules. And at the end of this, it said operating rules for UAVs. An unmanned aircraft, this is in the UK, must never be flown beyond the normal unaided line of sight of the person operating it. This is generally measured as 500 meters horizontally or 400 feet vertically. An unmanned aircraft fitted with a camera must always be flown at least 50 meters distance away from a person, vehicle, building, or structure. An unmanned aircraft fitted with a camera must not be flown within 150 meters of a congested area or a large group of people, such as a sporting event or concert. And then Carl continues, this is from Carl, not the article. As I've said before, and everybody else says, love the show, keep the 3-hour episodes coming. Let's see. And the next time I send you feedback, it will be voice feedback, as it might be nice for you to hear my British Yorkshire accent. Also, see the link below for a funny video. And I've seen this before, and this is Yorkshire Airlines. Let's see if I can get this thing to come up, and we can listen to a little bit of it on YouTube. It's a YouTube link.
Off on your holes? Don't know who to fly with? Then why don't you go up and away with Yorkshire Airlines?
And we see people boarding this airplane. Flight attendants.
Our Air Dorises will always give you the warmest of welcomes.
Wipe my bloody feet.
Our flight crew are the very best.
This is Captain Boycott speaking. During the flight, we'll be flying at whatever height I like for as long as I bloody like, because I'm captain, right?
And then he has, I think I've talked about this clip before, his yoke has a beer tap connected to it. So I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to watch the little YouTube clip of the Yorkshire Airlines. Very, very funny. Thank you, Carl, for sending in the feedback. And again, if you want to watch that YouTube link of the Yorkshire Airlines, look for it in the show notes. And yeah, that's about all I can say about that. All right. Didn't catch that one right away, but that's good enough. Matt writes, I was curious how pilot bids were done before computers became so prevalent. How did you do your bids when you first started at your airline? Was it something done in base, or could it be done remotely? I really enjoy the show and look forward to hearing back from you. Thanks, Matt. Well, thank you, Matt. Okay, bidding in the old days. When I was first hired by Acme Airlines, we did not have a computer system available for us to do our bidding. And so what we would do, every month, about, I don't know, at the beginning of the month, prior to the month that you were bidding for, you would receive in your mailbox a big, well, it could be a thin package or a thick package or stack of papers, depending on how big your category was at your base. I was flying the 727 at the time. It was one of the bigger categories. And so I'd say the stack of papers probably about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/3 of an inch thick. And in the bid package, you would go through a few pages, and then you would start seeing the lines of time. And so you knew what your seniority was on that airplane, and you knew about where you would fall in as far as your bidding priority. But what you would do is you would look at all the different lines of time, and a line of time was basically the calendar month, and in a linear form, and you would see a trip departing on a certain day with a certain number, and then a few days off, and then usually the same trip with the same number of days off, and we call those pure lines of time. And so the senior people would end up getting these lines of time. So let's say the number one line was probably something like a 3-day trip departing on Monday, coming in on Wednesday, and then 4 days off. And then again the next week, the same thing, Monday through Wednesday, 4 days off, usually the same trip. And then the second line may be some kind of either a different trip or maybe the same trip leaving on a Tuesday instead of a Monday, etc. And so you go through all these things, and you would kind of go, you know what, I really like this line right here, would really fit with my schedule because I need these days off, and I'd like to be off on the weekends, and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a certain point where all the lines of time became little X's, and X's on certain days, and then there was nothing on the other days. And the X's mean that those are your days off. We call them X days, days off. And then there was like one grouping of days that were asterisks and not X's, and those were your like golden days off. So those were like the extra special 3 or 4 days off that they just absolutely would not call you to fly on those days unless they just had to. So if you're not very senior on the airplane, then you would look at the reserve lines, and you'd look at the days you wanted to have off, and then you'd start bidding for those reserve lines that looked like they were something that would fit with your schedule. And then so what you would do is you would actually write those numbers on a piece of paper, and then you would take that piece of paper and you would hand it to the scheduler, which at that time was actually in or connected to the pilot lounge in Atlanta. And each scheduler or scheduling desk had its own little cubicle, and you go in and there was like a place for you to put your piece of paper, and that was your bid. Now, could we do that remotely? Yeah, you could. Back in the days before computers, you could actually call up a certain telephone number, and then you could put in, going through all the little different prompts, you could put in 5 lines of time at a time, and then would go over and review the line numbers that you bid for, and then would say, okay, now would you like to bid some more? If so, yes, press 1. If no, press 2. And then you go through and do the same thing over again. And it got really kind of complicated because if you were bidding things that were not numbers, then you'd have to use like a certain key combination to put in letters. It was just really a mess. So, bidding by phone was one of those last resort things that you would do unless you just had to do it. Also at that time, we had something called bidding services. I think that's what we called them. There were a couple of private entrepreneurs who were providing a service to bid for you. And so what you would do is you would give them your preferences and say, look, these are the days I want to have off. I don't want to fly on the weekends. This is the kind of trip I want to fly. I want layovers at these cities and blah, blah, blah. And then they would go and they would actually do all the work for you and go through all those different lines of times and figure out which ones were the best ones and which ones were not so great. And they would actually do the bidding for you, and you'd have to pay them. I don't know what they were charging at the time, maybe $15 a month, $20 a month, I'm not sure. And they would do the bidding for you. They would fill out the piece of paper for you, they'd submit it, or they'd use the telephone system. I don't recall exactly how they did it. So it was a very long, intensive, drawn-out, labor-intensive process. And then when the computer bidding came in, for many, many years, we were doing the same kind of line of time bidding, but we were doing it with the computer. It was a lot easier. And then about, I don't know how long ago, at least a decade ago, I think, we ended up shifting from a line of time bidding system to a preferential bidding system. We call it PBS. And this is where we can go in and put in certain preferences and basically letting the computer come up with a line of time or a schedule based on your preferences, days off, types of trips you want to fly, places you want to lay over, maximum amount of legs per day, etc. So I kind of do a hybrid system. I use a piece of software called, I think it's called EasyBid, where I can go in and load up my preferences, and then it will show me on a line of time kind of a presentation the trips that meet the preferences that I stipulated. And then I can go through and look at each one of those, and I can click on them or double click on them, and I can see what the trip is. And then I can, if I want, I can say, ooh, I like that one better than this one. Both of them qualify for what I've said my preference is, but I like this one better than this one. And so I'll actually specifically bid a certain trip on a certain day. And I'll do that probably, I'll bid for maybe 10 trips like that. And then beyond that, I'm thinking, well, just use my preferences to give me a trip that meets what I stipulated, and I'll be happy. And luckily, I'm senior enough in my position right now that I'll get usually my first or second choice, so it's pretty nice. If I were further down the list, then I probably wouldn't get my first or second choice, and I would have to let the computer system just give me something that met my preferences, hopefully. It gets a lot more complicated than that. I mean, I do a very simple, I use the preferential bidding system very, very simply. There are people that do all kinds of strange, complicated routines, and if you can't meet any of these things, then start over, forget all the bids I just put in, and start over from this and use these preferences, and it gets pretty complicated. And luckily and happily, I don't have to do that because I'm senior enough where I don't have to. So I hope that answered your question about what did we do before computers. And there were a lot of other things that we did before computers, keeping track of our out times or off times or on times or in times, and doing all the calculations for credit and all the different rigs that we had for time on duty and time away from base, and it was just a big mess. And I think I've mentioned this in previous episodes, where if you were on a regular line of time, it was a white 8.5 by, 14, the legal sheet size. We had a special clipboard or notebook that would hold these big giant sheets. And if somebody was on reserve, then they would have a yellow piece of paper, and you'd keep track of all their stuff, and you'd have to put all that information on that one. And if somebody were on a different type of pickup, like a white slip pickup or a green slip, then that would be another piece of, it was just a big mess. It was very time consuming, but the good thing about it was that you really knew what the contract was and what the different credits were, and you learned a lot about your contract. Nowadays, you don't have to worry about it because the computer does everything, and you just have to trust that it's doing what it's supposed to, I guess. Although there are still people out there that double check everything and make sure that it's being done correctly. All right, so again, Matt, I hope that answered your question about bidding. Tim writes, "Hi there, Captain Jeff. Just wondering if I could ask a question on the 777 drama going on at the moment. Say this 777 is on the ground somewhere. Could somebody reprogram the transponder so that it could squawk or ping a completely different type of aircraft type and registration number? If so, all you would need is a couple thousand liters of paint to cover the livery and registration number, and you would never see this aircraft again. Thanks for your time and comments. Best wishes as always. Cheers, Tim." Well, you know what? The only way that this would work, I think, Tim, is that, basically the transponder, you're assigned a certain squawk code, a 4-digit code from air traffic control. So when you submit your flight plan to air traffic control, actually our dispatcher at Acme does that for us, they will assign a strip, and they will assign us the computer system assigns us a 4-digit code. And when we get our pre-departure clearance, either by the ACARS or calling up manually on the radio and getting our clearance, They give us that squawk code, and we put it into our transponder box. If you had the ability to know what transponder code was assigned to a different airplane, I suppose that you could put in that code and then basically pretend to be another airplane and another registration number, etc. But you'd have to have some way of knowing what the transponder code would be for that particular airplane. I'm not sure how you would figure that out. But as far as the box is concerned, if I just squawked any kind of squawk, air traffic control wouldn't know what kind of airplane we were, because the only way that they tie our information with our registration number and our airplane type and our flight plan, routing, and everything else is with that 4-digit discrete code. And so there's nothing in the box itself that sends out a specific piece of information that says, oh, I'm an MD-88 and my registration is this number and whatever. There's nothing in there, as far as I know, that does that. It's just a box that you put in the code, and the computer system at air traffic control knows, oh, code number 4352 is Acme Flight 432 going from Atlanta to Tucson. This is the registration number. This is their flight plan. This is their strip. The other problem I can see with using another flight's discrete transponder code is that if two airplanes are airborne at the same time using the same code, then the air traffic control computer system is going to go, what? This doesn't make any sense. This can't happen. There are two airplanes out there using the same 4-digit code, and it would throw up all kinds of flags. So I think that's another potential problem with that scenario as far as using somebody else's transponder code. And that's my understanding of it, Tim, and I hope that helped answer your question. Okay, a couple of you, Nick and Derek, wrote in about this article about electric taxiing motors. Nick writes, just say this, maybe could be in the next episode. He gave me the link. And then Derek wrote, I saw this link posted on flightaware.com and thought it was interesting and didn't know if you had heard of this. And I have talked about these systems in the past on the show. This is a good time to say, if you're new to the show, you've never listened to me before, you may be tempted to go back all the way to the beginning to episode number 1. And actually, I have pre-episode number 1 episodes. Before I rebranded this podcast, I was called The Catholic Pilot. I have about 40 of those episodes, too, which are very much like what you're listening to right now. But before you go back to any of the earlier episodes or even my Catholic Pilot episodes, I just want to let you know that you don't need to, because I end up talking about the same thing a lot over time, and it's too stressful for you to go back and listen to my earlier shows. And a lot of the news, of course, is only applicable to that time and not now. Now, the feedback and questions, for the most part, are what they call evergreen content, which means that, the answer that I gave 2 years ago is probably going to be the same answer that I give to the same question today. But, if you've got a lot of time and you have a lot of commuting time to do or whatever, and you want to listen to those older, I'm not going to dissuade you from doing that, but don't feel like you have to. Okay, you're not really missing much of anything. So chances are I'll probably cover it on a future episode. So I have talked about these electric taxiing motors in the past, but just in case you didn't hear me talk about it, I'll read a little bit of this article. Mexican airline Interjet has signed a memorandum of understanding with Honeywell and Safran, developers of the Electric Green Taxiing System, or the EGTS, to become the first airline in the Americas to use the system, which will save airlines up to $450,000 per plane per year once it comes to market. EGTS uses electricity provided by the plane's auxiliary power unit, APU, and to motors on the plane's main wheels to allow the plane to taxi without the use of its main engines, much like how a hybrid car uses only its battery at slow speeds. The motors allow the plane to be controlled both forward and reverse, meaning a pushback tug would not be required for the plane to depart from the gate. In addition, less moving vehicles, I think they should say, whoever the journalist is here, you are improperly using the word less. I think what the journalist meant to say is, in addition, fewer moving vehicles in the gate area creates a safer environment for ground crews. So, and that's true. On the other hand, they also talk about the fact that, when aircraft engines are idling on the ground, they're consuming a lot of fuel, and there's a potential for foreign object debris damage, FOD, etc. And that's true as well. Now, my problem, or my skepticism, I guess, with these systems is, not skepticism, there are a couple drawbacks about using a system that has electric motors attached to your main gear wheels. Number one, it adds weight to the airplane, so you have to kind of factor that in. You're carrying more weight, so you're not able to carry as much as you could without these big, heavy electric motors. Number two, it says, you have to have electricity. So, and I fly airplanes all the time. I'd say probably maybe 5 to 10% of the flights that I fly, our auxiliary power unit is written up for some reason. It's not working. So I don't have an auxiliary power unit available to provide electricity. I'm tied to the electricity at the gate or the electricity being produced by the generators of my propulsion engines. Okay, so if that were the case, if I'm at going to an airplane whose auxiliary power unit is not working, but we have this system that requires electricity, well, I'm not going to be able to use that system. They're going to have to use a tug. So there's a potential problem. I'd say for the most part, though, most of the time, you're going to have an auxiliary power unit working, which will allow you to use this electric motor system. So that's good. Another potential pitfall or problem with the system is that while it is saving a lot of fuel, not having your engines running, we do have to have a certain amount of time for the engines to start and for the engines to warm up at idle power. We're not allowed to advance the throttles to take off power until we have a minimum warm-up period satisfied. And conversely, or in addition to, after we've landed, we have a certain amount of time that we have to wait for our engines to cool before we shut down the engine. So, and a lot of times, the time that you have the engines running to get the warm-up is about as long as it's going to take you to get out to the runway. So you're not really being inefficient in any way. And also, coming in, several times, we're sitting at the gate once we have arrived, waiting for that cool-down period to expire. And for the airplanes that I'm flying right now, the MD-88 and MD-90, 3 minutes. So we may end up flying into somewhere, roll right off the runway, go right to the gate, and we have to sit there for another minute or two and wait for that cool-down period to run its course before we can actually shut down the engine. So again, in that situation, these electric motors wouldn't really be, you wouldn't use them because you need to have the engines running for warm-up and cool-down. So now, people who are in favor of these systems, and I'm not saying I'm not in favor of them, I'm just seeing some potential limitations with them, would say to me, well, what about some of these airports where you have these long taxi queues and you depart from the gate and you're not taking off for another half an hour? Well, yeah, in this case, as long as your APU is working, you have electricity, it makes a lot of sense to have this kind of system. You're going to save a lot of money. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it works out for some of these airlines that are starting to use these new electric motor systems. And I think that if they prove to be worth the expense and they work with the flow of the operation, then I think you're going to see this in use at more and more airlines. So we'll have to keep our eyes and ears open for what happens with, let's see, who was it again? That is Mexican airline Interjet has signed a memorandum of understanding. So who knows how long it's going to be before this is actually on the market and in use, but we'll definitely we'll let you know. So thank you, Nick and Derek, for your feedback about that. All right, Nathan says, my name is Nathan, and I'm an Airbus pilot based in ORD, Chicago O'Hare International. First, I'd like to say thanks for your podcast. You're welcome. I really enjoy listening, and you make my MSP to ORD commute much more enjoyable. Thank you, Nathan, for saying so. The reason for my email today is in response to one of your listeners, Nick, question on episode 111 regarding the Airbus 320 and slats and flaps down at the gate while fueling. On the Airbus 319, 320, 321, there are 4 slat flap positions: 0, 1, 2, 3, and full. Position 1 automatically extends the slats with the flaps. The Airbus procedure is to keep the slats. The reason why I was pausing there is you said there are 4 positions, and then you said 0, 1, 2, 3, and full. That's 5. I know what you mean. The Airbus procedure is to keep the slats extended and only retract to 1 after landing when the temperature is 30 degrees centigrade or Celsius or greater. Which one is it? Centigrade or Celsius? I seem to use those interchangeably. Is there a difference? There is the increased chance of false bleed leak warning with the slats stowed in high temperatures. Additionally, we are required to leave them extended if we accumulated any ice communication on approach and landing until the ground crew has inspected them. This is to prevent structural damage from the ice buildup during retraction. So I guess to answer Nick's question, why you would see the slats extended at the gate, you would need to know the weather conditions. That would leave the third possibility. The pilots just missed it on the checklist. No way, Nathan. We'd never miss. You know that. Nobody ever misses an item on the checklist. Never. He says, hope this helps. Hope to bum a ride to or from work from you someday. Yeah, that'd be fun. I've occasionally flown from MSP to ORD, Nathan, so make sure you poke your head into the cockpit and see if I am operating the airplane. Be fun. Okay, Tim Van Ram writes, not sure if you've seen this video tour of the ISS, the International Space Station, that Commander Sonny Williams did that are on YouTube. And it's Expedition 33 Commander Sonny Williams starts off her tour of the International Space Station with a look at its nodes, Harmony, Tranquility, and Unity, which include the crew's sleeping quarters and hygiene station. After that, it's on to look at the Destiny, Kibo, and Columbus labs as well. And it goes on talking about, and I looked at, it's like a 40-something minute long tour of the ISS, and I watched about 15 to 20 minutes. The very beginning of it talks about the sleep stations and also the place where they go to use the bathroom. And it's fascinating. So check out the link in the show notes, which are somewhere down here on this page. And you too can watch Commander Sonny Williams and her tour of the ISS. Thank you, Tim, for the nice tip. Vernon writes in, yet another reason why pilotless commercial aircraft won't ever fly. Can you imagine the outcome of this event without the knowledge and communication of two knowledgeable pilots up front? I think he was referring to the incident with the Delta MD-88 that landed without hydraulic power at John F. Kennedy International a few weeks back. He said, the journalist who thinks pilots are only there to make mistakes needs to let his computer write his opinions without him being present. Good point, Vernon, retired certified flight instructor and former air traffic controller. Thanks again for all your support, Vernon, and your participation in the Airline Pilot Guy show. It's very much appreciated. Let's see. Let's do this one. Let's see. I received this. I'm on the email list for the National Transportation Safety Board news releases. They released one on April 17th, just a few days back. What day is today? The 23rd? Yeah, about 5 days ago. 6 days ago. The National Transportation Safety Board is presenting a seminar highlighting the lessons learned from the NTSB's investigations of general aviation accidents involving aerodynamic stalls and loss of control. Accidents attributed to loss of control in flight are the most common defining events for fatal crashes in the personal flying sector of general aviation, accounting for about 40% of GA fatalities. For this seminar, the NTSB has partnered with other organizations also committed to enhancing GA safety: the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Society of Aviation and Flight Educators, which has a really cool acronym, SAFE, who will all be participating in the event. And NTSB board member Earl Weiner will be a featured presenter, and attendees will have the opportunity to meet and ask questions of member Weiner, NTSB staff, and other presenters. I think somebody had fun with this press release. Okay, so that's in the Washington area at the NTSB Training Center in Ashburn, Virginia on Saturday, May 10th. The link will be in the show notes if you'd like to attend. It's free and open to the public, but it's limited to 200 attendees. Early registration is highly recommended. So if you want to attend this seminar, I think that if you're in the area and you are available on Saturday the 10th of May, I think you should check it out. Go now. Register and get one of those places. And then you can be a roving APG reporter and tell us what you thought about the seminar. That'd be cool, huh? I think so, at least. So, there you go. All right. Ahmad in Nigeria, I believe, writes, hello, Jeff. Would you or any of your listeners know why the Engine 1 pylon on Boeing 707 jets is shaped differently from the pylons of engines 2, 3, and 4? I've been noticing this on all the 707s I've seen at airports, on TV, and in printed media. Thanks. Well, I did some research, and I suspected I knew what you were talking about, but I wanted to make sure. So I did find this on the airliners.net forum, and I found a picture as well of the pylons on the Boeing 707. The forward part of the engine pylons for number 2, 3, and 4 have the turbo compressors needed for the aircraft cabin pressurization system. Engine number 1 did not have the compressor. In the early jet airplane days, the FAA did not allow engine bleed air, or dirty air, to be used for cabin pressurization. They had to use outside air. The turbo compressors used engine bleed air to drive a pump that compressed the outside air and pumped it into the cabin. Nowadays, engine bleed air is used for direct cabin pressurization. And again, that's from the airliners.net forum, but I'd say one exception is the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. I think this post was written before the Boeing 787 came out. They do not use pneumatic air for pressurization on that airplane. So thank you to the airliners.net forum for helping me answer the question, and Ahmad, thanks for asking it. Chris Johnson wrote, and he said he shared a video playlist with me, and one of the videos on his playlist was an Embraer, looks like a 170 at the gate somewhere, and the pilots are starting the engines, and one of the ground crew workers near the number one, the left engine, is pulling a cone away and is holding it up in front of the intake. And yep, you guessed it, the number one engine is running, and it is sucking air into its inlet, and along with the safety cone being held by the ground worker, and it goes zoop, right into the intake and right out the back. You can kind of see a puff of smoke, and then you can watch the two uniformed pilots in the cockpit kind of moving around right after that happens, like, what was that? So I'll have a link in the show notes to the if you follow me on Facebook, Airline Pilot Guy, then you'll have seen this post that I did last week. But if not, check out the show notes, and it's right there. You can check out this video. It's a very short one. So thank you very much, Chris, for sending in that bit of feedback. Yeah, I'm running out of little pieces of music to play. That's right. I guess I'll just go on without any... Well, here, I can play this. Randy writes, "Hello, Captain Jeff. Big fan of your podcast. Just wondering if you have any more info on that UPS plane, the crash trying to land in Arkansas, I believe. I think it was, Birmingham, Alabama. I plan on sending you some audio feedback sometime, but for now, this is my only question. Keep up the good work and keep the wheels on the runway." Of course, unless we're trying to fly, right? Randy Fields writes that, and thank you, Randy. And did a quick check of the ntsb.gov site on the investigation of the UPS crash, and so far all they have is the preliminary report, which was published a while back, and I anticipate, because the accident occurred in August of last year, that we'll probably see something mid to late summer of this year with the final report on the accident. So thanks, Randy, for your feedback. David writes, "Hi, Skipper. Do you read the monthly compilation of ASRS reports on a newsletter called Callback? It seems to me that flying is an exercise in excellence, and that the ASRS system furthers that pursuit. Frankly, it almost takes too much sense to be a government program. Perhaps your non-professional pilot listeners would be interested in learning about the program. My own experience was in blowing a clearance, got a clear to land while thinking touch and go. I was gently admonished by the controller. He didn't give me a call this number, but in speaking with other pilots was urged to use the system. Tailwinds from Sport Pilot David." And I do, David, subscribe to the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System newsletter entitled Callback. And you too, dear listener, can do the same, and I think it's well worth it. They only put out an issue once a month, so it's not like they're going to spam your email inbox. And it's a monthly compilation, maybe a couple pages, PDF, that picks out a few of their reports, and it's usually based on some kind of a theme. This last one, the April edition, the theme is issue number 411. The theme is communication, communication, and communication. Where have you heard that? Communication is so important. And they talk about, why communication is so important. And they're talking about cockpit resource management and other things. And I think communication is more than just cockpit resource management. It's just in any kind of relationship you have, whether it's with your fellow crew member, whether it's with the cabin crew members, whether it's with the gate agent, the ground agent, the ground controller, the tower controller, the en route controller. You get the idea. Anybody you have any kind of communication with, it's important to make it good communication. And let me just read. Oh, and again, I'll have the link in the show notes for the way that you can subscribe. It's free to the NASA ASRS system callback newsletter. And speaking of the latest edition, the April 2014 edition, I would like to read the first one that they listed here, and they're all good, but I just don't have enough time to read the entire newsletter while I'm here online or on doing the show. But let me read this first one. One of the most important aspects of communication in the cockpit is that it establishes the interpersonal climate between crew members and is therefore a key element in setting the tone for the management of the flight. In this report from a C-750 co-pilot, we get one perspective on an accident that involves a rather stormy interpersonal climate. And this was, here we go, here's the report. I was second in command and pilot flying on the blank arrival. There were a series of published altitudes and speeds, plus a NOTAM changing some of those speeds. Approach gave me a descent to 8,000 feet, which I understood to mean unrestricted except for the speeds. I was achieving this using vertical speed mode with the autopilot engaged. I was descending through 9,500 feet and slowing from 250 to 220 knots when the captain began to argue that I should use VNAV instead of vertical speed, despite the fact that I was meeting the speed and altitude restrictions another way. I suggested we could talk about technique and automation on the ground. Suddenly, the speed began to increase above 250 knots, and I realized that the captain had engaged the VNAV without any consent, and the flight director was commanding a speed of 340 knots. Now, mind you, they're below 10,000 feet. The speed limit below 10,000 feet is 250 knots. And the flight director was commanding a speed of 340 knots. The throttles were all the way up. Okay, back to his report. By the time I recognized this, I went back to vertical speed and deployed the speed brakes. We had crossed the next fix and exceeded the speed limit of 220 by about 20 knots. I think this situation could have been avoided if the captain had either A, left me to continue to meet all clearances and regulations the way I was doing it, or B, taken the controls and met those same restrictions his way. I suggest that no one should interfere with the flight controls unless there is some breach of safety, not because of differences of technique, and certainly not merely to achieve their own way. And then the NASA reporting system goes on to say, while the climate of a flight depends to a large extent on the attitude and conduct of the captain, every crew member should be aware of the importance of a good working atmosphere and strive to employ the communication skills that are vital to achieving it. I couldn't agree more. And I don't understand people like this captain who decide that it's going to be my way or the highway, and they basically start doing things while you're the pilot flying and without the pilot's consent or even knowledge of what's going on. And that's just, that's very, very, very unacceptable. I always brief my first officers that I don't care how you fly the airplane, as long as it's safe and comfortable. In other words, nothing unsafe. It's comfortable for the passengers, and we don't have to do any paperwork and fill out any NASA forms to keep us from getting violated. So if you want to use vertical speed or VNAV or indicated airspeed mode, throttles on, throttles off, I don't care. You're a pilot. You're trained to fly the airplane. You know what the restrictions are on this arrival, and I'm going to let you do it. Unless I see something that's going to be breaking a rule, I'm not going to say anything. So I just don't get the power play in some of these. I think a lot of the times it's because the other person, in this case the captain, doesn't have a firm grasp of other modes of automation. They only know one, and then when the person that they're flying with is using one that they're not familiar with, because of their inadequate knowledge of it or inexperience with it, they freak out. They can't stand it. They gotta enforce the other person using whatever technique it is that they always use, and that's just not right, in my opinion. So anyway, if you want to read more stuff like that, make sure you use the link to subscribe to the ASRS, Aviation Safety Reporting System by NASA, their callback newsletter. Okay, this is from Gordon, and he writes, that's kind of an inside joke, right? Gordon, thought you might find this following blog entry interesting. And he has a link here. It's by Sam Weigel, a flying magazine columnist and an airline pilot, currently transitioning from flying the Embraer 170-175, which he semi-affectionately dubs the Jungle Bus, to a new airline where he'll be flying the good old Mad Dog. He's expecting it to be a challenging transition, partly because of the extremely automated nature of the Embraer systems. As he describes it, my colleagues and I often theorized that this airplane, he's talking about the Jungle Jet, no, the Jungle Bus. My colleagues and I often theorized that this airplane was designed to be flown in challenging third world conditions by inexperienced, occasionally fatigued crews, and most of the time it will keep even this lowest common denominator crew out of serious trouble. The flip side of this equation, he points out, is the danger of automation dependency, which he attempted to mitigate by hand flying whenever appropriate and backing up the VNAV with the trusty old 3-to-1 rule. Where have you heard that? This sounds very much in line with the comments I've heard you make on your podcast, so I thought you might enjoy reading Sam's thoughts on the subject. Gordon continues, I'm merely an instrument-rated private pilot, but your stories and observations always enliven my morning commute and allow me to occasionally imagine being a steely-eyed kerosene-burning sky god while I wait for the Toyota ahead of me to let the clutch out. May you always get clear direct, and may the layover hotel always have a continental breakfast. Gordon, actually. Thank you, Gordon. That's very funny, and thank you for that link to the blog posting from Sam Weigel of Flying Magazine. And I just want to add that I am not a steely-eyed, kerosene-burning sky god. Far from it. Just an average line flying pilot doing the best I can to provide safe, comfortable transportation for the masses. So thanks again, Gordon, for sending in the feedback. It's always appreciated. And speaking of appreciated, here is Hideous Jake.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is First Officer Jake calling in. I just finished episode 113. Fantastic job, as always. I have one comment, one question. The comment being regarding FAR 17 and pilot commuting. Personally, I'm glad that they left it as it is. I do believe it should be up to the pilot to decide whether he or she is fit to fly after commuting in, and to make the appropriate decisions based on the length of their commute and the time that they're commuting to determine whether they are safe to fly. However, as a commuter, I do recognize that's a biased opinion. The question I have regarding feedback that you had from episode 113 is Uminum out there in San Francisco. Is that the same Uminum that they talk about on the Muppets in their theme song? Anyway, I'm just joking there, but
probably not.
Wanted to say excellent job, keep up the good work, and one more thing. I can't believe that you called Vernon a tool. That guy seems so nice. Really? Anyway, have a great day.
Well, he is a tool, right, Vernon? No, I'm just kidding. He knows what I meant, and I just realized while I was listening to your great feedback, Jake, that I was calling Gordon Cassidy. Oh, it's the same guy. Never mind. Okay, never mind. So back to Jake's comments about the commuting thing and FAR 117, and I understand where you're coming from because you are a commuter. And yeah, you're probably right. It's probably best to leave all of the discretion and determination of fitness for flying in the hands of the pilot. And if you can honestly sign that flight release stating that you are fit for duty, then I guess you are. So I appreciate your comments regarding that. And Umanum, I don't know what to say about that. All right. Thanks again, Jake, I always enjoy your comments. Tim writes, your recent mention of TWA Flight 800 documentary sent me into an internet search to look into the tragedy more, which was very interesting indeed. As I'm sure you can understand, the search sent me to many other areas of interest and ended up looking into the Exxon Valdez disaster with the recent 25th anniversary on March 24th. Now, I know you are asking yourself, how can this relate to aviation? I was surprised to see this connection as well. Joseph Hazelwood, who has been vilified in the media as the main cause for the spill, has this connection from Wikipedia. Hazelwood was born in Hawkinsville, Georgia, but was raised in Huntington, New York, on the North Shore of Long Island. Number one, his father, Joseph, born in 1922, was a United States Marine Corps torpedo bomber pilot turned airline pilot. And also in common was a huge mistake in navigation, which can and does happen in flying. That's true, Tim. The story most Americans know that the reason the ship ran aground was the captain was drunk. Turns out the media was in need of a simple story to feed to consumers that was not really the truth. Gee, where have I heard this before? The G Captain podcast that I listened to devoted a fine episode to the disaster and setting the story right. And he has a link in here to the G Captain podcast and the episode where they talk about the Exxon Valdez disaster. And he said, I found the story told in the podcast enlightening and informative. Regards, Tim Van Ram. Thank you, Tim. As always, appreciate your comments. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Got a lot of links in the show notes. I hope I remember to put them all in. Okay, Gordon is back again. He said, hey, when you're departing an airport when IFR conditions prevail, do you preload the approach procedure for the airport you're departing from in case you have to make an emergency return right after takeoff? I remember my instrument instructor recommending having the plate for the departure airport at hand in case you had an emergency and had to shoot the approach right back into the departure airport. Just wondering if in an FMS-equipped airplane there's a provision for loading an approach right at the beginning of the flight as a standby, or whether that would screw up the programmed flight plan. So, to answer your question, Gordon, I do not, but I asked my first officer on this trip, hey, do you know of any guys that do that? And he said, yeah, I've flown with a few that do. And I said, well, how do they do that? And we have Route 1 and Route 2 in our flight management system interface, where you can load up a separate route, your regular route for Route 1, and then you can put in a alternative routing in Route 2. And I've used that function before, but never to put an approach back into the airport from which I'm leaving. And one of the reasons I do that is because I don't depend so much on the flight management system to do all my navigation, especially if I have a problem right after takeoff and I have to come back in to the airport from which I left, and it's under instrument meteorological conditions. I'm probably going to just get that plate out and dial in the localizer, probably go to raw data and just look at it that way. If we have time, or my first officer wants to put the approach into the box, which would take just a few keystrokes to do, that's fine. But for me, using the raw data, I'm comfortable with that, and that's what I would do. But apparently there are people that do that. And again, in the FMS box that we use on the airplane that I fly, the way that you would do that would be to put it in the other route page and then activate the other route, and then you have that approach available for you. So good question, by the way. And that is my answer. How are we doing on time here? 1:16. Getting close to the end of the show here. George sent in some feedback. Let's listen to George.
Hi, Captain Jeff. It's George here again from London. My second audio feedback to you. Thank you for answering my first two questions clearly. It was helpful. Thank you. My question today is regarding your previous episode when you explained that you had phoned in sick and you were unable to fly your legs. My question is, are there any official guidelines that state when and when you cannot fly due to illness or injury at your airline or any other airline that you're aware of? My second question is a bit more light-hearted. I have favourite airlines, and I'm not quite sure why they're my favourite. I might like their livery, or I might like the fleet they fly, or their attitude towards the industry. For instance, I like Swiss International Airlines, and I love Emirates. I've flown on Emirates a few times, and I love the airline. Every time I see a plane or whatever, I've got to take a photo of it. I think they're an amazing airline. Do you have a favourite airline outside America, say? And if you do, could you explain the reasons why you like that airline? Maybe you like your own airline. I know you can't talk about it in detail. Well, you can't use the name anyway. There's my two questions. Thank you again for the podcast, and talk to you soon.
Okay, well, as far as favorite airlines, I really haven't thought about it that much. I'd say, just off the top of my head, I like Qantas's attitude because they always come up with some very creative things, like their safety videos. You'll recall they've had all kinds of different interesting safety videos. For instance, the one where they had the flight attendants and pilots, or one of the pilots, I think, in body paint, and they were basically nude, but they had body paint on. But of course, they were, they used discretion in filming the safety video, so it wasn't obvious. They weren't showing body parts that you could really stare at and say, "Oh yeah, I've seen that." But I thought that was kind of interesting, the way they are kind of on the cutting edge of safety videos. Let's see, Virgin Atlantic. I just like their general attitude. I don't know. I'm just coming up with stuff right out of the, whatever. I don't know. I think most of the airlines out there I have a lot of respect for. I don't really have a favorite, actually, I guess what I'm trying to say, other than Acme. That's my favorite. But I know what you're saying. Sometimes the livery, the paint jobs on the airplane, the logos are super cool. Sometimes you really appreciate the attitude of the upper management of the airline. Sometimes you really, stuff like that. It's kind of a personal thing. And but I don't really have a definitive answer for you there. Sorry, George. And then regarding the first part of your question, George wrote, recently sent you some audio feedback in which I asked a question about airlines. If airlines have rules about when you can and cannot fly due to illness. And he said, I sent you this. I'd only watched half of the episode. And then you basically answer my question, answering someone else's question about fatigue. Yeah, so sort of answering that question, George, I can probably go into a little bit more detail. Basically, as I talked about, the I'm safe thing, if you're under the influence of medications, or you're fatigued, or, if for any reason you think that you're just not in a physical, mental, or emotional state to give basically all you have to give to operate the flight safely, then that's when you say, I can't sign this release, and I guess I'm going to have to take myself off the flight. Now, in my case, it was a physical thing. It was a physiological thing about clearing my ears, and that's why I said, you know what, it's not going to work. I'm not going to be able to do this trip. I've known instances where pilots have had some kind of thing going on in their family, and there's some emotional baggage that they're carrying around, and it's such an emotional burden that they can't concentrate. They're distracted so much that they can't safely execute the job, and so that's when they call up the chief pilot and say, "I'm sorry, I need some time off." And regardless of what that's going to mean for my paycheck, I got to have some time off. And at Acme, anyway, they've always been very accommodating for that kind of thing. You know, knowing that we are in whole people. We're not just robots flying airplanes. We have lives. We have relationships. We have wives and husbands and children and interpersonal relationships that sometimes don't always go entirely smoothly, and they understand that there are times when things are happening that can be so distracting that it's a liability for the airline to have that person at the controls. So, and I'm very, very blessed to fly for an airline that has that kind of attitude. So there are a myriad of reasons, not necessarily rules. The rule is basically, if you think, as pilot in command or second in command or whatever, that you are not fit for flying that particular flight, and you can't sign the flight release stating such, then you can't. And that's when you have to take steps to take yourself off the trip. So I think that's what you gathered from my comments, George, and thanks so much for your feedback. I do appreciate that, especially your audio feedback. And you may have noticed, folks, that I made this off-the-cuff pronouncement on the last episode that I was going to start doing the audio feedback first and then saving all the non-audio feedback for the rest of the episode. And after I finished with that episode and started doing the editing, I started thinking to myself, that really wasn't a smart thing to say or a smart decision to make. And I also received a little bit of feedback from some of you saying, "Hey, Captain Jeff, I don't think that's a good idea." And I like the variety of different types of feedback, and you all are right. So I've decided to rescind that proclamation about audio feedback first. So never mind. All right. Again, it's time to bid adieu. Whatever. I'm not French. It's time for me to say goodbye. And thank you again for, especially if you're sitting there in front of your computer watching me, or your smartphone, your tablet device watching me on YouTube. Thanks for hanging in there and watching me the whole time. Again, I highly recommend that if you like the podcast to figure out how to download it as an audible or audio downloadable podcast. I think that you'll find it more efficient to listen to me that way. And all that information about where you can find me, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, etc., is all on the airlinepilotguy.com website. Again, thanks to Arash for managing my website for me and all the SEO and all that other techie, geeky stuff that I don't know very much about, and keeping the website looking really nice. And as I mentioned before, he has some things in the works to make the website operate more efficiently and quickly. So thank you, Arash, for your friendship and your hard work with the website. It's really appreciated. Again, everybody donating to the airlinepilotguy.com, the Airline Pilot Guy Coffee Fund, thank you, because I definitely need caffeine. And feedback, if you want to send your feedback, if you really want me to see it, send it to feedback@airlinepilotguy.com. A myriad of many different ways to send it. YouTube comments, website comments, the website contact me page, where you can fill out a form, which goes to feedback@airlinepilotguy.com. My Google Voice feedback line, 304-997-4568, that's 99Pilot. And SpeakPipe, that's also another option. Yields very legible, high-quality audio for your audio feedback. And, of course, many of you know that you can use your smartphone to record using the voice memo app or whatever recording application you have, and attach that to an email and send it to feedback@airlinepilotguy.com. Okay, I think that covers everything. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of this Airline Pilot Guy endeavor. Without you all, there wouldn't be a show. You know, I just kind of cover some of the news and answer your questions, and as soon as everybody stops asking questions, then I'll be able to pack up my suitcase and move on. But until then, I'm going to be here, your friend and your fellow aviator, and yeah, that's about it. So until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care and God bless.
Good day.